AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, is the largest, most public organization of the Israel lobby in the United States. Every year, AIPAC holds a major policy conference in Washington where members of the pro-Israel group gather alongside members of the U.S. Congress, as well as Israeli politicians and other high-profile supporters of the Jewish state. Last year, approximately two-thirds of the Congress, as well as President Obama, were in attendance. This year, the president is returning to AIPAC for what the Israeli newspaper Haaretz has called the largest AIPAC conference ever. At the same time, over 130 national and international organizations came together for Occupy AIPAC. Code Pink co-founder Medea Benjamin explained the event's purpose.
This entire city and even this country is just shaking in its boots around whatever AIPAC says and whatever AIPAC wants, and somebody's got to stand up to that enormous giant that is destroying our policy towards the Middle East.
Saturday, as AIPAC participants received their credentials at the convention center's AIPAC Village, a panel of experts and activists convened in the church across the street at Occupy AIPAC's Policy Summit. They discussed the pending legislation meant to harden the U.S.'s military line on Iran's nuclear program, as well as the effects of economic sanctions on the Iranian regime. A recurring theme was the parallels between the contemporary discourse around Iran and the lead-up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Jamal Abdi, policy director of the National Iranian American Council, addressed the panel.
What's happening right now on Capitol Hill, and what is being strongly supported by Bibi Netanyahu and by AIPAC, is to say, okay, fine. Iran's not working to build a nuclear weapon, fine. Instead of saying that our red line is Iran building a bomb, we're going to say our red line is Iran having the capability to build a bomb. So if Iran even theoretically could have the capability to build a bomb, we need to go in and strike them.
They are introducing a resolution backing the use of U.S. military force, to stop Iranian leaders from getting their hands on nuclear weapons.
And now we have a resolution introduced in the Senate by our good friends Joe Lieberman, Lindsey Graham, and Bob Casey, and in the House by the leaders of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Ross Layton and Berman.
But Barack Obama and others in both major U.S. parties have spoken of economic sanctions as an alternative to military action in Iran.
I will take no options off the table, and I mean what I say.
But as with the crippling sanctions imposed on Iraq for more than a decade, military conflict becomes more likely as an isolated regime tightens its grip on a suffering population. Sanam Naragi Anderlini is co-founder of the International Civil Society Action Network.
We say we don't want war, and we're taking sanctions to be the acceptable alternative option, as opposed to diplomacy, as opposed to talking to people. But there is also this mentality that if we make it tough enough, people will rise up and bring about regime change in Iran, because ultimately we want to get rid of this regime. So what sanctions have done is they've undermined the private sector. They have emboldened the black market and the more insidious elements of the government. We have created a situation where for the most extreme elements in the government over there, we are basically with enemies like the ones we have. Who needs friends? Because they want isolation. They want a sort of pressure. That's what they've been thriving on instead of openness.
And the sanctions do not only target Iran, but any political or economic entity that does not take the U.S.-Israeli hardline against Iran. Kate Gould is a legislative associate with the Friends Committee on National Legislation.
So it's the classic, you're either with us or against us kind of ideology we saw under the Bush administration being enacted into economic warfare.
But one distinction between the current push for war in Iran and the 2003 push for war in Iraq often goes unmentioned, and that is the issue of multilateralism. Former New York Times Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Hedges explains.
George W. Bush, whose disregard for the rule of law was legend, went to the UN for a resolution to attack Iraq. But in this current debate over the war with Iran, that pretense of legality is ignored. Where is Israel's UN resolution offering it to strike Iran? Why isn't anyone demanding that Israel seek one? Why does the only discussion in the media and among political elites center around the questions of will Israel attack Iran? Can it successfully carry out a strike? What will happen if there is an attack? The essential question is left unasked. Does Israel have the right to attack Iran?
After spending Saturday indoors for the policy summit, Occupy AIPAC took to the streets Sunday for a day of action. Again, the focus was on sending a strong message against starting or supporting a new war against Iran. Several of the AIPAC attendees who spoke to The Real News believed that Iran is an irrational actor and is seeking the destruction of the State of Israel. Ron Strasberg is an Israeli visiting Washington for the first time.
I don't think anybody wants war with anybody. The issue right now is not about a war. It's about resolving the issue with Iran, trying to maybe destroy Israel, or maybe at least that's what they claim they're trying to do. And once we have Iran with a nuclear weapon, it's going to be very difficult to deal with Iran.
Eva Beam came to the policy conference from San Diego.
So when Ahmadinejad says, I want to slaughter Israelis, I want to then slaughter Americans, I have to believe him.
But according to Jamal Abdi and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Iran is a rational actor.
Is a rational actor that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff testified to Congress twice this past week and got into kind of testy arguments with Congress about this idea. But what he said was, by calling your adversaries irrational, you're doing yourself a great disservice because you're not actually putting yourself up to the challenge. If you just say, well, they're irrational, so we can't deal with them.
And despite the lack of cleavage between the U.S. and Israel on the issue of occupation and the construction of Jewish settlements on occupied Palestinian land, protesters made sure that AIPAC attendees heard the voice of the movement for Palestinian rights. Nadia Itresh is a Palestinian-American organizer with Code Pink.
I have family living in the West Bank who are living daily under the Israeli occupation. It's time for the world, for the Americans to stand up for peace and justice.
What's next for the movement to prevent war with Iran?
We have to revive the large anti-war coalition that existed to try to stop a war around Iraq. And not just the obvious people who were against the last wars, but new people that are coming out, new members of the, former members of the military who think this is a terrible idea, members of the faith-based community that have not been speaking out, that need to speak out. So we're reaching out to new communities now to encourage them to not wait until it's too late, till there already is attacks on Iran, but to speak out right now.
For The Real News, I'm Noah Gimbel in Washington.